They'll tell you 100 ways a woman can ruin her life. Marry the wrong man. Run from the right one. Knock on a door in the dark when every soul in town has sworn that door belongs to the devil. What they won't tell you is which warning to believe. I've been keeping the ledger on this ranch for 19 years. Cattle in, cattle out. Rain when we get it, which isn't often. I write down the weather every morning before my coffee's even cool, because numbers don't lie and people do, and after a certain age, a man would rather trust the numbers. But there's one night the ledger only says 4 words for, wind out of north. That's all I could manage. Because that was the night the runaway bride came up the road in a wedding dress the color of old bone, with mud to her knees and her shoes gone, and she walked past every safe house in the county to stand on the one porch she'd been warned about her whole life. Everyone warned her about the cowboy. She knocked anyway. And I'm going to tell you exactly what happened after, the parts the town got right, and the parts they got so wrong it makes my chest hurt to think on it. Stay with me, because by the end, you're going to have to decide something the same as she did. You're going to have to decide who you believe. The first I knew of her was the dog. Old Pell didn't bark at much anymore. He was deaf in one ear and lazy in both, and by that age in his life, a thunderstorm could roll right over the bunkhouse and he'd sleep through it like a paid man on Sunday. So when he came up off the porch boards growling low, that long mean rumble he saved for snakes and strangers, I knew it wasn't weather. I set down my coffee. I remember that I set it down on the rail and it was still steaming, and I thought, whatever this is, I'd like to finish that first, and I never did. It went cold and I poured it out at dawn. The rain had been coming since supper, not the soft kind. The kind that comes sideways in this country, that finds the gap in your hat brim and runs cold down your collar, that turns the wagon road to a black soup you could lose a boot in. I'd lit the lamp in the kitchen window because Wade liked it lit, said a dark house looked like a grave, and he had reasons to think so that I'll get to. She came out of that rain like the road itself had given birth to her. I want you to see it the way I saw it, because I've turned it over 1,000 times and I still can't make it ordinary. A shape on the road, then a woman, then a bride, and that's the thing that stopped the breath in me, a woman in a wedding dress, the satin of it gone gray and heavy with water so it dragged behind her like she was hauling her own drowned shadow. No shoes. Hair come loose from whatever they'd pinned it up with, plastered to her face. One hand holding her skirts up out of the mud, the other pressed flat against her chest like she was keeping something inside from falling out. She didn't see me at first, the dark and the rain. She came up the steps slow, careful, the way you walk when your legs have already walked too far, and she lifted her hand to the door and she stopped. Stopped with her knuckles an inch from the wood. I've watched a lot of people stand on this porch. Cattle buyers, preachers, the sheriff twice, a man once who came to kill Wade and lost his nerve at the sight of him. I never saw anybody stand the way she stood right then. Like the door was the edge of a cliff. Like knocking on it was a thing you couldn't take back, same as stepping off. And here's what I think, what I'll go to my grave thinking. I think every word anybody had ever said to her about this place was right there in that inch of air between her hand and the door. Don't. Not that one. Not the Halloran place. You know what they say about him. You know what he did to. She knocked 3 times. Soft, then harder, like the first try was for herself, and the rest were for whoever was inside. I came around the rail so she'd know she wasn't alone in the dark, and I said, "Easy now, miss," in the voice you'd use on a spooked filly, and she turned and looked at me and lowered her face. I'm an old man. I've buried a wife and 3 friends and a child that didn't live a week. I know what grief looks like wearing a person, but she wasn't grieving. She was deciding. Her whole face was the face of someone in the middle of choosing, with the choosing not yet done, and she looked at me the way you'd look at a stranger you were about to hand your life to, weighing it, weighing me. "Is this Wade Halloran's house?" she said. Not really a question. Her teeth were going so hard the words came out in pieces. "It is." They told me, she stopped, swallowed. They told me he'd kill me before he'd help me. They told me he killed his wife and the law couldn't prove it and that's why he's got no neighbors and no friends and her voice climbed and broke and she got hold of it again, got hold of it with both hands you could almost see, and she finished quieter than she started. Everybody told me, the whole way here, even my own father before even him. And you came anyway. She looked down at her ruined dress like she was seeing it for the first time. When she looked back up there was something in her face I'd call defiance, if defiance didn't sound too proud for how scared she was underneath it. There wasn't anywhere left that wasn't his, she said. Clayton. He owns the bank and he owns the sheriff and he owns my father's note and he was going to own me by noon tomorrow. She wrapped her arms around herself. So I figured, if the whole town's afraid of one man, then one man's the only door in this county Clayton can't make open. I didn't have an answer for that. It was, when you said it down plain, just about the smartest terrible idea I ever heard. The door opened behind her. She felt it more than heard it, I think, the warmth coming out, the lamplight throwing her shadow long across the wet boards. She turned slow. Wade filled the doorway the way he fills any space he's in, which is completely and without trying. Big through the shoulders, gone gray early at the temples, a face that the years and the weather and the rumors had carved down to something hard to read. He had his shirt half-buttoned, and his hand was still near the gun belt hung by the door, not on it, but near, because a man in his position learns to keep his hand near a great many things. He looked at her a long moment. The rain filled up the quiet. "You're letting the cold in," is what he finally said, to me, not to her. "Wade, there's a runaway in a wedding dress on my porch at midnight, Boone." His eyes hadn't left her. "I've got eyes. Questions whether I've got the sense God gave a fence post, and I'm leaning toward no, on account of I'm about to ask her in. I want to tell you," he said it gentle. He didn't. There wasn't a soft thing in his voice, but there are kinds of mercy that don't bother sounding like mercy, and that was one. He stepped back from the door just enough and turned his shoulder, which on Wade Halloran is the whole speech. She didn't move. "You know what they say about you," she said, quiet, testing him, "in town." "I do. Is it true?" And here's where I learned the first true thing about Wade I hadn't already known in 19 years, because in 19 years I never once heard anybody ask him to his face. People talked about him. Nobody talked to him. It was easier on everyone to keep him a story. He didn't flinch from it. "Some," he said. "Some of it's true, not the part you're scared of." A muscle moved in his jaw. "My wife's buried up on that rise behind the house. I dug the grave. I've never raised my hand to a woman in my life, and I'm not going to start tonight with one half drowned on my steps. You can believe that or you can walk back into the rain. Either one. But decide it's standing inside where it's dry, because watching you shake out here is starting to make my teeth hurt." She came in. I followed, and Pell followed me, and that's how the four of us, 5, counting the dog, ended up in Wade Halloran's kitchen at midnight, with a runaway bride dripping a black puddle onto the floor and nobody knowing yet how much of the county was going to come apart over it. Her name was Juniper Marsh. Junie. She told us over the first cup of coffee, the way you'd offer a name to people you weren't sure you'd live long enough to need it. I got a blanket and the spare clothes off the line in the washroom, my dead wife's, kept all these years for no reason I ever named until that night. And Junie changed in the back while Wade and I sat at the table and didn't look at each other. "You know who Clayton Reese is," he said finally. I did. Everybody did. Reese owned half of Bitter Creek the way a tick owns the dog it's on. He'd come into the country 5 years back with money nobody could trace and a smile nobody trusted. And he'd done the patient, ugly work of buying up notes and debts and favors until you couldn't sneeze in that town without him deciding whether you got to keep the handkerchief. He'd taken a shine to the Marsh girl 2 summers running. Her father, I knew, was into the bank past the eyes. "He'll come here," I said. "He'll come here. Wade turned his cup in his hands. Questions whether he comes with the sheriff and a paper, or whether he comes the other way. Which you reckon? With a man like that, Wade almost smiled, and it wasn't a nice thing to see. He'll try the paper first. Men like Reese love a paper, makes the ugly part legal. He looked toward the back room where the lamp showed Junie's shadow moving. If the paper doesn't work, then the other way. I have to tell you what was in Wade's face when he said that, because it's the heart of this whole thing, and I won't have you misjudging him the way the town did. It wasn't fear. Wade had been past fear for years. The rumors had cost him so much there wasn't a great deal left to take. And it wasn't excitement, the way some men get a shine on them at the smell of a fight. It was tiredness. The bone-deep tiredness of a man who has just watched a small door he didn't know was still open swing shut, and who knows exactly what it's going to cost him to have let her through it, and is going to pay it anyway. You could put her on a horse at dawn, I said, careful. Point her north, wash your hands. I could. It'd be the smart thing. It would. He finished his coffee, set the cup down soft. Boone, you've kept that ledger of yours 19 years. You ever go back and read the days you were proud of? Now and again. Any of them the days you did the smart thing? I thought about it. I'm thinking about it still. He had me and he knew it, and he didn't gloat, just got up and put another log on and stood with his back to me. A big tired man warming his hands at his own fire in his own house that he was about to set on the line for a stranger. Junie came back out in my dead wife's blue dress. It fit her near enough. She'd washed her face and braided her hair back wet, and she looked younger and older both, the way people do when the storms passed off their face and you can see the person under it. I can pay you, she said. Not now, but I will. I'm not asking for charity. You're not paying me, Wade said, not turning around. I won't be a debt. I've had enough of being a debt to last. You're not a debt. He turned then. You're a guest. There's a difference, and out here it's about the only difference that still means anything. You eat what we eat, and you work if you're able, and when it's safe you go where you're going. That's the whole arrangement. There's no paper. He said paper like it tasted bad. You understand me. Nobody in this house signs anything tonight. Something went out of her at that. Some held breath she'd been carrying maybe for years. She sat down at the table like her strings were cut, and she put her face in her hands, and she didn't cry exactly, just shook, the way the ground shakes a little when something big falls a long way off. I wrote 4 words in the ledger the next morning. Wind out of north. I couldn't have told you the rain, the temperature, the cloud, all the things I'd faithfully set down for 19 years. My hand wouldn't make the numbers. I just sat at the kitchen table while the other 2 slept, the bride in the back room and Wade in his chair by the door with the gun belt finally on, across his knees, and I watched the gray come up over the rise where his first wife lay, and I thought about doors, and the inch of air a person stands in before they knock. I didn't know yet that the rider was already coming. I didn't know that by the time I scratched those 4 useless words, Clayton Reese had a man saddled and the man was halfway up our road, and that the paper Wade had been so sure of had a second page nobody'd told us about. But Pell knew. Pell came up off the floor growling that long mean rumble, the snake-hand stranger one, and Wade was on his feet with the belt buckled before the dog finished the first breath of it. Boone, he said, real quiet, the kind of quiet that's louder than yelling. Wake the girl, tell her to get her shoes. She hasn't got shoes. He looked at me, and for just a second the tiredness cracked and I saw under it the thing the town never got to see, the thing his wife must have married him for before the world made him a monster in its mouth. Then give her mine, he said. And he opened the door onto the gray. The rider was a boy. That's the first thing that threw us. We were braced for one of Reese's hard cases. He kept 3 or 4, men with quiet hands and no histories, and instead it was a kid of maybe 16 on a lathered horse, hatless, scared near out of his skin, holding a folded paper out at arm's length like it might bite. Mr. Halloran. His voice cracked clean in half. Mr. Reese sends he says you're to read this and there's to be an answer by sundown. Wade didn't take the paper. He let the boy hold it out there in the cold while he looked him over slow. You ride all night to bring me this? Yes, sir. He pay you? The boy hesitated. He said he'd take it off my pa's account. Wade and I traded a look. Off the account. That was Reese all over. He didn't even spend money to ruin people. He spent the debt they already owed him, so that the very act of being crushed put you deeper under. A boy rides all night in the rain and ends up owing more than he started. Get down, Wade said. Boone, get this horse some water and the boy some breakfast. Sir, I'm not to. You're not to come inside, I know. Reese told you that. Wade finally reached out and took the paper, 2 fingers like picking up something dead. He tells everybody that. Get down anyway. A man that won't feed a tired boy on a cold morning isn't a man worth being afraid of, and I'd rather you go home and tell him I'm not worth being afraid of. Save us all some grief. The boy got down. He ate 3 biscuits and most of the bacon, and he watched Junie the whole time with the dawning, terrible understanding of a kid realizing he's a small part of something big and bad. And when he rode out an hour later, he wouldn't meet anybody's eye. I've thought about that boy since. I hope he got clear of that country. I hope he doesn't still owe for those biscuits. The paper was an eviction. Not on us, on the marshes. Junie's father had signed his land to the bank against a loan years back, the way half the county had, and there was a clause, the kind of clause men like Reese pay lawyers to bury, that the note came due in full upon any act by the family bringing the institution into disrepute. A daughter running from her own wedding to hide with the most notorious man in the territory. That'd do it. He's not after you, Wade said, reading it twice. Not first. He's after your father. He'll put the old man off his land by Friday and let the whole county watch it happen, and then he'll let it be known that all your father has to do to get it back is bring you home. He set the paper down. He's going to make your own father come and collect you, so that when the door closes, it's family that closed it and nobody's hands look dirty but yours. Junie had gone white. He put my father out, it's January. My father's 61 and his chest is bad and she stood up fast. I have to go back, you see that. I have to go back or my father. Sit down, Wade said. You don't understand. I understand exactly. Sit down, Junie. And there was something in it, not unkind but absolutely immovable, that put her back in the chair. He crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye, his bad knee popping, and he spoke to her the way I'd never heard him speak to a living soul. Low, even, like he was laying down stones for her to walk on across deep water. If you go back, here is what happens. You marry Reese. Your father keeps his land for a while. And the thing that made you knock on my door at midnight in the rain, the thing you ran from with no shoes on, that thing is your whole life now until it's done with you. You'll have bought your father a few years and sold yourself the entire rest of them. And here's the part nobody tells you about that trade because they want you to make it. He paused. It won't even fix it. Men like Reese don't keep bargains. He'll take you and the land both in time because that's what he is, and your father will die anyway, ashamed, knowing what he let you do. There's no clean way out the door you came in. There's only forward through a worse one or a better one, and you don't get to go back to before you knocked. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the fire. How do you know, Junie whispered. How do you know what men like him do? And Wade Halloran told her. He told her the thing the town had been chewing on for 6 years and getting wrong on purpose, because the wrong version was a better story. His wife, Sarah, hadn't died by his hand. She died of a fever in the spring in the bad year, when the doctor in Bitter Creek wouldn't ride out because the Halloran account was short, and Reese, who owned the doctor's note same as everyone's, had let it be quietly understood that the Halloran place was not somewhere a careful man spent his charity. Wade had ridden into town himself, into the storm, and dragged the doctor out by the collar, and they'd come back to find Sarah already cooling. And Wade, grief-mad, half drowned, out of his mind, had said a thing in the street that night, to Reese, in front of witnesses. He'd said, "I'll kill you for this." And 6 months later, Reese's foreman turned up shot dead in a draw on the far side of the county, a man Wade had never met, and that was all the town needed. The grieving widower with murder in his mouth and a body nobody could account for. It didn't matter that Wade was 40 miles away buying cattle with a dozen witnesses. The story was already built. Reese had built it. And he'd built it because of what Wade saw, that Sarah died of Reese's cruelty dressed up as commerce, and that Wade knew it, and that a man who knew it had to be made into a thing nobody would ever listen to. "That's how I know what he does," Wade said. "He doesn't kill you. He makes everyone agree you were already dead, so when you finally go, nobody comes asking. He did it to me. He's doing it to you right now tonight with that paper. He's making it so that whatever happens to Juniper Marsh, the whole county will say she did it to herself by knocking on the wrong door." Junie looked at him a long time. "Then they're already saying it," she said slowly, "about me." "They are. So I've got nothing left to protect by going back. The thing he was going to take by making me afraid." Her voice firmed up as she walked herself through it, and I watched something happen in her face that I'll remember to my last day. Watched the fear turn, not vanish, but turn, the way a current turns when it hits a rock and finds it stronger than the rock. "He's already taken it. My good name's already gone, so it can't be the leash anymore. He spent it too early." Wade looked at her like a man who just watched somebody pick up a tool he'd thought too heavy for them. "Now you understand him," he said quietly. "That's more than most ever do. They were the best 3 weeks I've spent on this earth. And I'm not ashamed to say it, about 3 weeks that nearly got us all killed." Junie worked. God, how she worked. She'd been raised soft. You could tell her hands blistered the first day on the wood and bled the second, but she didn't quit and she didn't complain and she didn't let either of us baby her. She learned to milk. She learned the chickens. She found my ledger and she found my 4 useless words from that first morning, whined out of North. And she never said anything about them, but the next day there was a full entry in a hand that wasn't mine. The weather and the temperature and a note about the heifer that was off her feed. And after that she kept the ledger, and she kept it better than I ever had. There was a night the heifer calved early in the cold, and the 3 of us were out in the lean-to till dawn, Junie up to her elbows in it, Wade with his coat off in 20 degrees, me holding the lamp. And the calf came blue and still, and we worked it, and Junie wouldn't let it go. Rubbed it and breathed in its nose and swore at it in language that peel paint. "You live. You stubborn little, you live," and it lived. It lived. And she sat back in the straw all over blood and birth and laughed, until the laughing turned into something else. And Wade put his coat around her shoulders and didn't say anything. And I went and stood outside and looked at the stars a while to give them the room. I'm not going to tell you they fell in love because that word's too small and too cheap for what I watched. I'll tell you what I saw instead. I saw 2 people who'd each been turned into a story by other people. The murderer, the runaway, slowly become real to each other, just real. A man and a woman, scared and tired and decent, finding out the rumors were the lie and the person was the truth. That's rarer than love and worth more. Love you can have for a story. What they had, you can only have for a person. The morally heavy part came on the 19th day. That's when Junie's father came up the road. He came alone, on foot, his bad chest making him stop twice on the rise where I could see him from the window. Reese had finally turned the screw. The eviction was real, Friday was real, and the old man had walked out from Bitter Creek to do the thing Reese designed for him to do, to stand in front of his daughter and let her see what staying would cost. Junie went out to him. We let her go alone, some doors you can't walk a person through. They stood out there in the cold a long time, the old man's hat in his hands, and I couldn't hear it, and I'm glad I couldn't. When she came back and her face was wet and set like stone. "He's not asking me to come back," she said. "That's the worst of it. He came all this way and he stood there and he said," her voice cracked, "he said don't. He said he'd rather lose the land than lose me to that man. He said he's old and the land's just dirt and I'm not." She pressed her hand to her mouth. He walked 9 miles in the cold to tell me to let him be ruined, and I have to decide whether to let him. There it is. There's the choice, not the easy one the stories give you. Reese had been too clever for an easy one. He'd built it so that whatever Junie chose, she lost something she couldn't bear to lose, herself, or her father's home and maybe his life with it. He'd made love into the trap. That was his whole art. Wade stood up. "There's a third door," he said. We both looked at him. "You've been thinking about 2 doors," he said to Junie, "because Reese only built 2. Go back and be ruined, or stay and let your father be ruined. But Reese forgot something, same as he forgets it with everybody, because it's the one thing money can't buy, and so he stops believing it's real." He buckled on the gun belt, slow, deliberate, the way a man does a thing he's made his peace with. He forgot that some people, when you take away everything they're afraid to lose, stop being afraid. And a person with nothing left to lose is the one thing in this world Clayton Reese has never once known how to beat. Because his whole game is the fear. Take the fear away, and there's nothing under it. There's just a man who owns a lot of paper, in a county full of people who have all just figured out at the same time that they've got nothing left to lose either. "What are you saying?" Junie whispered. "I'm saying it's 19 days you've worked this ranch and kept that ledger and pulled that calf back from dead, and every soul between here and Bitter Creek who said you knocked on the wrong door is wrong, and I'm tired, Junie. I'm tired of being the story they tell instead of the man who's standing here." He picked up his hat. "I'm saying Friday, when Reese puts your father off that land in front of the whole town to watch, let's give the town something else to watch." Friday came up clear and cold, the kind of Texas winter morning where the sky's so blue and high it looks like it's been scrubbed, and Bitter Creek filled up like it was a hanging, because to most of them it was the next best thing. Reese knew how to put on a show. He had a folding table set up in the street outside the bank, and a man with a ledger of his own, and the sheriff standing by looking at his boots. And the Marsh place was to be auctioned off the courthouse steps at noon, with the old man made to stand and watch, and Reese in a gray coat worth more than my year's wages moving through the crowd shaking hands. Sorrowful, regretful, such a shame, but the law's the law. That was the part of him that worked. He never gloated. He always grieved. He made his cruelty look like something the world was doing to all of them together, himself included, poor man, his hands tied by the paper. We came in at 1:15. The 4 of us, Wade, Junie, me, and the calf she'd saved trotting along behind on a lead like a dog, which I'd argued against and lost, and which turned out to be the smartest thing any of us did, but I'll get to that. The street went quiet the way a held breath is quiet. They hadn't seen Wade Halloran in town in 6 years. He'd had his goods freighted out, kept to the ranch, let himself be a rumor. And here he came down the middle of the street in the cold light with a woman in a blue dress on one side and an old foreman on the other, walking like a man who decided something. And you could feel the story they'd all agreed on start to crack down the middle, because a story can survive anything except the thing it's about walking into the room. Reese recovered fast, I'll give him that. "Halloran," he smiled his sorrowful smile, "this is a surprise, and Miss Marsh," the smile sharpened, "your father will be relieved. We'd begun to fear the worst. There's still time, you know, to set this all right. A wedding can be a small private thing. The note can be reconsidered for family." And there it was, the door he'd built, swung open one last time, right there in the street, with the whole town watching to see her walk through it. "Marry me and your father keeps his home." He even managed to make it sound like mercy. Junie stepped forward. She didn't shout. I want you to know that. She'd practiced it on the ride in, and Wade had told her don't shout. His kind win the shouting. You tell it plain. And she told it plain, in a voice that carried because the street was so quiet, to her father standing pale by the courthouse steps, and to the boy who'd brought us the paper standing in the crowd, and to every soul who owed Clayton Reese a note or a favor or a fear. "My father's land is mortgaged to this man," she said. "Same as the Proots, same as the Garzas and the Stocktons and the doctors, and I guess the better part of everybody standing here. He calls them in when it suits him and forgives them when it buys him something, and he's taught you all to be grateful when he doesn't ruin you, which is a strange thing to be grateful for if you stop and think on it. She turned slow, taking in the crowd. 6 years ago a man told you Wade Halloran killed his wife. That man was Clayton Reese. The truth is Sarah Halloran died because this man let it be known the doctor shouldn't ride out to a family behind on a note. She died of his arithmetic, and he made you all afraid of the grieving husband so you'd never ask who really had the blood on him. The street made a sound, low, a lot of people thinking the same thought at once. Reese was still smiling, but it had gone to wax. This is grief and hysteria. The girl's been 3 weeks alone with a violent. I've been 3 weeks pulling calves and keeping a ledger and learning that the most dangerous man in this county sleeps in a chair by his door because he's still afraid somebody'll come finish the story you started. Junie's voice didn't shake now. The fear had all turned to current. You spent my good name early, Mr. Reese, to make me afraid. You spent everybody's. And I came here to tell you in front of all of them that it's all spent. There's nothing left in me for you to threaten. And I'd look around, if I were you, at how many of these faces just figured out the same thing about themselves. I have stood in a lot of quiet in my life. I never stood in quiet like that. It was the old man broke it, Junie's father. He'd been leaning on the courthouse rail and he straightened up and he said in a voice ruined by his bad chest but loud enough, "Take the land, Reese. I won't sign and I won't beg. Take it. I'd sooner own nothing honest than owe you everything." And he walked down the steps and stood by his daughter. Then the doctor stepped out of the crowd. Then a man I didn't know who turned out to be Prout. Then the Garza family, all of them. Not a mob, that's the thing, it wasn't a mob, there was no shouting and no fists. It was quieter and far worse for Reese than that. It was just people, walking out of the crowd, 1 and 2 at a time and going to stand on the other side of the street. The side with the murderer and the runaway and the calf, who picked exactly that moment to let out a long, indignant bawl that broke something in the awful tension. And somebody laughed. And once a crowd laughs at a man like Reese, he is finished. Because his whole power was that nobody ever dared. He didn't lose everything that day. Men like that have money in places the law can't reach, and he kept the bank and he kept the better part of his paper. But the fear was gone, and the fear was the engine. And a Reese without fear was just a sour man with a ledger in a town that had stopped being afraid to read it. He left Bitter Creek before the spring, sold out cheap to back east interests and went, and good riddance, and I won't waste more words on him than he wasted mercy on us. The Marsh place got saved. The town carried the note between them, a little here and a little there, the way it should have always been done, the way Reese had spent years making sure they never thought to. Junie's father lived another 4 years, and they were good ones, and he spent a fair number of them up at our ranch, sitting on the porch arguing with Wade about cattle, 2 stubborn old men who'd each thought they'd lost a daughter and found they hadn't. Wade and Junie married in the spring, up on the rise, near Sarah's grave, which some folks thought strange, and I thought was the truest thing I ever saw. Junie planted bluebonnets up there and tended them same as she tended everything. And Wade stood at that wedding like a man who'd been let out of a long cold and couldn't quite believe the sun. The preacher who'd refused to ride out 6 years before came and married them for free, which was as close to an apology as that man had in him, and Wade let him, which was as close to forgiveness as the moment needed. I kept the ledger another 2 years before my eyes went and Junie took it over for good. She let me read the old entries sometimes. We came across that first morning's once, wind out of north, 4 words, my hand shaking so bad you could see the cold in it. "You never did write what the weather was," she said. "Couldn't make my hand do the numbers." She was quiet a while looking at it. Then she took up the pen, and under my 4 words in the careful hand she'd taught herself those first hard weeks, she wrote a 5th line, dated that day 6 years gone, filling in the thing I'd never managed. I won't tell you what she wrote, some things a man ought to keep. But I'll tell you I read it more than any other page in 19 years of that book, and that when my time comes I've asked them to read it over me instead of scripture, and that it has to do with doors, and the inch of air a frightened person stands in before they knock, and what's waiting on the far side of the one they tell you not to.